In the early 19th century, throughout central and western New York, social justice movements were blossoming in the region that came to be known as the Burned-Over District. Religious revivals challenged Christian dogma, including subservience of women, opening the way to new religions and spiritual possibilities. As modern spiritualism began to flourish, so did the women's suffrage movement. The first local women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls in 1848, signaling the beginning of women organizing nationally for their rights. Religious reform and women's rights came together to form a mutually beneficial alliance that would change the future of United States democracy. Since the guiding principles of modern spiritualism is the equality of all souls, a channel for women to develop leadership and self-confidence became available. Female spiritualist mediums, who acted as conduits of information between the spirit realm and those of us in the living, breached the rules of Christianity's subjugation of women and Victorian propriety. Women's suffrage benefited greatly from the support of spiritualism's commitment to the equality of women. Not all suffragists became spiritualists, but spiritualism set a foundation of conditions for women's rights. It is perhaps not surprising that the suffragists, demanding equal rights, worked in parallel ways to the spiritualists opening new vistas for women. Now let's travel to a sleepy hamlet in New York State. Welcome to Lilydale. It looks like any other tiny town. Quaint little houses, quirky stores, a town hall, post office, church, and a pet cemetery where beloved companions are laid to rest. However, house nameplates such as Zen Glen and Fairy Frond House hint at a place where everything is more mysterious than it seems. Spiritualists, mediums, and healers have lived here almost 150 years. Victorian mediums conducted seances under candlelight, and the spirits from the past still come here to connect with their loved ones. Ensconced on the banks of Cassadaga Lake, 53 miles from Buffalo, this is Lilydale. A destination for visitors from around the world who are seeking peace, harmony, healing, and messages from the dead, particularly in the summer camp season. And since Lilydale has forever been a spiritualist community embracing the advancement of women, notable progressive women have been among those visitors. Here in Leland Woods, guests gather to celebrate their belief in life after death. Before there were benches for the guests to sit on, mediums would stand on the inspiration tree stump, bringing messages to the living from beyond the veil.
In 1847 and 1848, my family lived in a cottage in Hydesville, New York State. I am Maggie Fox, and this is my sister Kate. We were children when we were first contacted from the afterlife by a spirit who was murdered and buried in our cellar. The spirit contacted us via a rapping code, which we learned to interpret using the letters of the alphabet. Through a series of knocks, this code enables a spirit presence to communicate with the living.
The peddler tapped answers to questions from our neighbors. News of our ability to communicate with the dead spread quickly, and believers and skeptics alike came to visit us. Audiences were drawn to spirit communications. The desire to speak with loved ones who had passed took hold, and a social phenomenon was born. A few years after our deaths, the bones of a murdered peddler, Mr. Charles B. Rosna, were in fact unearthed from our cottage cellar, along with this tin trunk containing silks and laces.
In 1888, Maggie, having withstood years of persecution from non-believers, shocked the community by renouncing spiritualism, explaining how they had faked the spiritual communications. Later, she recanted that admission and confirmed that the experience they had were genuine, but the damage to their reputation had been done. With a proclivity for wine, both sisters' health failed, and in 1893, Kate died from kidney disease, and Maggie's death from heart disease came the following year. They died in abject poverty. Even so, these women are credited with developing physical mediumship and the founding of modern spiritualism. Jeremiah Carter was inspired by the Fox sisters. In 1879, he and members of the spiritualist group in Leona, New York, purchased 18 acres of land. They founded the religious corporation, Cassadaga Lake Free Association. This name was changed to the City of Light Assembly in 1903 and finally became the Lilydale Assembly 3 years later. Today, spiritualism continues in popularity. The tin trunk associated with the Fox sisters, now known as the Peddler's Pack, is housed in the Lilydale Museum. The Fox sisters' cottage also found a new home in Lilydale. Many more mediums will land in Lilydale, convincing even the worst doubters that there are thousands of messages coming from the astral plane. But Lilydale wasn't just home to spiritual entities. It provided a place for men and women to speak freely on issues of social reform. Pioneer leader of the suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony, and other activists were spreading the ideas of women's rights in mid-century America. Although not a formal member of the spiritualist movement, Anthony credits spiritualism as one of the few religious organizations that does not subjugate women. Lilydale generously supported the suffrage movement. Between 1891 and 1905, Anthony spoke at the annual Lilydale Women's Day 5 times. It is perhaps more than serendipitous that the word suffrage derives from Latin meaning prayers said after a departed soul.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to Lilydale today. I consider it an honor to join you for the Peace Conference of 1903 and Lilydale's Women's Day. As you may know, I was raised in the Quaker meeting, and I recognize some of my acquaintances from the North Collins Progressive Friends Quakers group. Welcome, friends. It has been almost a year since the passing of my closest friend and colleague, Mrs. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Over 50 years ago, Mrs. Stanton and Mrs. Lucretia Mott held the first Women's Rights Convention at the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls. Since then, we have continued to fight for social, civil, and religious reform, and spiritualism's guiding principle of equality, regardless of race, sex, ethnicity, or religious affiliation, merges seamlessly with those of the suffrage movement. Today, I recognize spiritualism as the only religious sect in the world that fully recognizes the equality of women. It provides its women followers with the opportunity for financial stability and public influence. Unlike the church, one does not need to be ordained to be a medium. The gift is all that is needed. But once again, I am honored to be here with you today in Lilydale. But before we go out and join the others who have gathered here for this historic event, please help me welcome the Venerable Reverend Dr. Anna Howard Shaw.
Thank you. It is my honor to be among you all today. A few years ago, a gentleman opposed to our enfranchisement said to me, "Women have never produced anything of value to the world." I told him the chief product of women had been men, and left him to decide whether the product was of any value. I tell you all, if we ever get to the polls once, you will never get us home. Please, join me in a moment of gratitude in memory of two dearly departed sisters. If not for them, we mightn't be here today celebrating the Peace Conference and Women's Day. Mrs. Lucretia Mott and Mrs. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Let us extol their indefatigable work writing the Declaration of Sentiments. Did any of you know that there was a spirit rapping on the very table upon which Mrs. Mott and Mrs. Stanton scribed the Declaration?
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Shaw, and you, friends, for joining us this morning in Lilydale. And now, let's go out and join the others and enjoy this wonderful event.
It took 72 years of organized struggle before American women achieved the same rights as men at the polling booth. In 1920, with the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women finally won the right to vote, guaranteed in the Constitution. In practice, however, through voter suppression, only white women could vote. It would take another generation before our sisters of color won this right.
I am done in. Messages from my spirit guide have been flying in continually all day. I feel I may have an attack of the vapors. There's the warmth of spirit coming close. Someone is coming through for Susan. Ah, for Miss Anthony.
Glory be. Well, yes, I'm here.
There is a family connection. I see a woman. Strong woman. I see an M, an A, Mary, Aunt Mary. Did you have an Aunt Mary?
Yes, I had an Aunt Mary. But I don't want to hear from you, Aunt Mary. I didn't want to hear from her when she was alive, and I certainly don't want to hear from her now that she's dead.
Oh, she is persistent, your Aunt Mary. She has an urgent message for you.
Well, this is hornswoggle. Why doesn't someone else come in, like Mrs. Stanton? I want to hear from Elizabeth Stanton. Why that dreary, dour-faced, grumpy old aunt of mine?
Anthony spoke at the Lilydale Peace Conference in 1903, with around 2,000 people in attendance. She supported spiritualism and its tradition of equality of women. However, she distanced herself from all organizations that were not specifically focused on women's suffrage.
She was criticized for abandoning others' causes, but remained committed to gaining voting rights for women. This was her life's work and only political dedication.
3 years after the Peace Conference, at a ripe old age of 86, Susan Brownell Anthony succumbed to pneumonia at her home in Rochester, New York. She did not live to realize her dream. her last public sentiment, spoken at the 1906 National Suffrage Convention in Baltimore, was,
"Failure is impossible."
The increased popularity of spiritualism helped propagate freedom of thought and speech, as well as gender equality. Perhaps the national notoriety of the Fox sisters brought women's voices to the forefront, which ultimately hung a spotlight on the women's movement. In 1916, after the Fox sisters were long gone, Benjamin Franklin Bartlett, a trustee of Lilydale, had the Fox cottage dismantled and transported, board by board, from Hydesville to Lilydale, and there reassembled it on East Street. Our next story is bound to that cottage. Shortly after the cottage arrived, Floyd Cottrell became the cottage caretaker and its resident medium. Floyd Cottrell's spirit guide, Uncle Ike, a most genial person and head of a host of 40 spirits, is hovering on the edge of an unknown dimension. This night, in the year 1938, Ike will leave his habitation in the infinite to knock out the alphabet on Floyd's bare heel, thus spelling out messages to an assortment of spiritual devotees.
Good evening, Miss Floyd. Thanks for meeting with me. I gotta tell you, I've always been a bit skeptical of all this mumbo jumbo. Tell me, how'd you get involved in all this?
Please, sit down.
You know, I wasn't always a spiritualist. When I was a teenager, my father and mother and brother and I started with some table tipping, just for fun. All at once, there'd be a series of loud raps. Well, that was the first appearance of my gay old ghost that I call Uncle Ike.
Do you only talk to Ike?
Oh, no, there's Lord McKinley, Longfellow. I talk to them all the time. But Uncle Ike, he's special. He's lighthearted and playful. He rapped Yankee Doodle once, and the other morning I asked him to be my alarm clock. Oh, he rapped really loud that morning. I nearly fell out of bed.
May I try to speak to Uncle Ike?
Of course.
Are you a person of prominence? Are you married? Is there anything disgraceful in your life that keeps you from revealing your real identity?
That means Uncle Ike is tired. And goodbye.
Oh, you son of a gun. Yankee Doodle. This is bamboozling. This skeptic may just become a believer.
The Fox sisters' cottage burned to the ground in September of 1955, and the site is now the Fox Memorial Garden, a favorite for spiritualist pilgrims and spiritually curious tourists. Our next guest to Lilydale was no newcomer to notoriety. An early supporter of the women's liberation movement, Mae West was an ardent supporter of spiritualism. Born in Brooklyn in 1893, she rose to fame as Hollywood's blonde bombshell who made assertiveness feminine. An American institution, she was Hollywood's first leading lady to deal her cards behind the camera, setting her salary and conditions, as well as her script writing and dialogue rights. By 1935, she was the highest paid woman in America. A natural psychic, she went to the spirit world for her answers. Laying in a trance, she would dictate her screenplays to stenographers. In 1941, she met Welshman Reverend Thomas Jack Kelly in California, and he became her spiritual counselor until his death almost 20 years later. Kelly lived in Buffalo, New York, and during summers practiced mediumship in Lilydale.
Don Blacklock. Worked in the Welsh mines too long.
How's your wife doing, darling?
Oh, Estelle. Oh, lovely. It has been 2 wonderful years since we tied the knot. With her 3 boys and my son, we have quite the brood between us.
I've remained not free. A dame who knows the ropes isn't likely to get tied up. I chose this lifestyle because I'm convinced that a woman has as much right as a man to live the way she wants. Liberation is always in the back of my mind. I represent the woman's ego. Spirit forces, come to me and help me write a script.
Jack Kelly was not only famous for healing, but for his exceptional clairvoyance. He would drive down Buffalo's main street with coins over his eyes and 3 separate blindfolds wrapped around his head without incident. Police would even ask him for help to solve murder cases.
Reverend, it says here that you healed a Mrs. Donna Ball who'd been blinded in an automobile accident, and you made her paralyzed hand useful again.
Yes, over at the auditorium. There are over 40 people present that day. I am going to contribute my earnings and build a healing temple right here in Lilydale. Lilydale. If only I could do some healing on myself. May, we've known each other 11 years, and we do have some time left, but I know this is going to kill me.
Oh, Jack, don't say that. We'd miss you too much.
Miss me? You'll be hearing from me.
After Jack Kelly's death in 1964, West reported that his spirit, dressed in a tuxedo, appeared to her.
He's come back. I always figured when you're dead, you're dead. But a few years ago, I come into my boudoir, and there's Mr. Kelly sitting in my chair. Jack was the world's greatest psychic.
UCLA students voted Mae West the Woman of the Year in 1971. Although West supported the women's movement and called herself a feminist, she was criticized by second-wave feminists who saw her flirtatious persona as perpetuating the male-pleasing female stereotype, which subjugated women. But West's Hollywood image, though the pervasive one, was superficial compared to the independence she lived and the respect she demanded. She advocated for the rights of women and the gay community beginning in the 1920s. Among her many exceptional accomplishments, she was a playwright, screenwriter, actor, director, and singer. Mae always ran the show. She would eventually become respected as the feminist who was way ahead of her time. After a series of strokes, Mae West died on November 22, 1980. A trailblazer in the advocacy of sexual frankness and a crusader against censorship. A woman who dared to stretch the boundaries of conventional sexual mores. Her legacy lives on. Jack Kelly and Mae West dedicated the Lilydale Healing Temple in 1955. A year later, it was gifted to the community. Since then, only spiritual healing is carried out in the temple, unless it's being used for a church service. Lilydale's year-round population is just under 300. However, during the summer months, over 22,000 global travelers descend upon this humble hamlet. Classes, lectures, workshops, public church services, mediumship demonstrations, and private readings are accessible to all.
If I asked for a cup of coffee, someone would search for the double meaning.
You're looking at the spirits of Kate and Maggie Fox, who inspired modern spiritualism. Floy Cottrell, the medium who carried on the Fox sisters' tradition of mediumship. Mae West, camp feminist icon, actor loved by millions. And Susan B. Anthony, suffragist, married only to her quest for the equality of women. These formidable women from a different time and space come together in our imagination. In reality, they were legends in their own time who ignited, blazed, and scorched religious and patriarchal dogma,
each leaving behind an extraordinary legacy of their earthly existence. The gap of ages dissolves in the mystic energy of Lilydale. Perhaps the last stop for all in the vast design of things.